Oh boy, it's time for another big one. And you already saw this from the title of the video. It's Steven Stone's signature Pokemon, Metagross. Metagross is one of those Pokemon whose design is so out there, but delightful in a way Pokemon pulls off so well. It's kinda like Magneton, where tons of its Prevos fuse together, except it's actually fused together and not just pasted together. And now it's a kick-ass robot spider supercomputer with 4 brains that gives it psychic powers. There's artwork of Steven and this thing that is some of the coolest stuff I've ever seen. And fun fact, in the anime, Steven's Metagross is shiny. I remember fighting Steven and Ruby and being flabbergasted by how strong his Metagross was. Steel and Psychic, whenever Meteor Mash landed, my heart sank. But then Metagross instilled that fear in the hearts of its other opponents? Let's find out, how good was Metagross actually? And in this video, we'll be covering these competitive formats. Spoiler alert, yes it did. Metagross has everything going for it. Incredible stats, arguably 2 of the best types in the game that even cover each other's weaknesses, and even a huge move pool. Just look at that attack stat. That's Salamence's attack stat too. Second highest non-legendary in the game when these 2 came out, only behind Slacking. But what Salamence had in speed and special attack, Metagross made up for it with its whopping defense stat, making it a terrifying tank. With the Choice Band equipped, Metagross was hitting for absurd numbers, especially with access to some of the strongest base power moves in the game in Meteor Mash, Earthquake, and Explosion. And remember, this was when Explosion still cut defense in half when you used it. So anything that didn't resist that move was pretty much guaranteed dead. And actually, even if they did resist it, Explosion had a 50% chance to one-hit KO even Skarmory. Even opposing Metagross had to be afraid of getting blown up on. This set was so powerful that it bypassed the fact that Steel was a relatively weak attacking type. But even then, Metagross had his choice of coverage moves in Rock Slide or Sludge Bomb to deal with fire types or bulky water types that it wanted to poison. It could even run Hidden Power Fire to deal with steel types that didn't take super effective damage from Earthquake, like Fortress and Skarmory, doing decent damage with its not so horrible special attack. Speaking of Hidden Power, some Metagross actually specced into special attack in order to lure and punish the ever-present Swampert, who really didn't like Hidden Power Grass. And if you wanted Metagross to sweep, the Choice Band could be dropped for leftovers and Agility swapped in for coverage. Metagross had a quite easy time getting off a boost because of its steel typing. Metagross could even lean into mixed typing and run a mixed set designed to deal with walls like Skarmory and Weezing, who would be dealt with quite easily with significant special attack investment because they were mainly just planning to wall Metagross out. This worked especially well because Weezing's main plan was to burn Metagross with Will-O-Wisp. Finally, Rest Talk Metagross took advantage of Meteor Mash's attack boost chance to potentially steamroll teams and stay active, though it of course meant giving up Explosion because he didn't want to randomly blow up while sleeping. Oh yeah, and Clear Body meant Intimidate or even Charm couldn't do anything to Metagross, although Burn was still quite effective. Metagross's quote-unquote counters, so to speak, were those who could deal with its attack typings. While Metagross did have quite a varied move pool, the necessity of running Meteor Mash and Earthquake for the power on most of his sets meant that Weezing and bulky water types did exceptionally well. Milotic, Weezing, Swampert, and Vaporeon all did well, stalling it out and building their boosts. The aforementioned Skarmory and Fortress also did very well against the most standard Metagrosses, setting up their hazards while tanking hits well. But that's the thing, they did well against standard sets, but Metagross could be wildly unpredictable. I'm talking about its ability to fill in its move pool gaps and invest in special defense, but I'm also really just talking about Explosion. Metagross's Explosion was a game-defining move. For Metagross players, removing potential Ghost-type switch-ins was paramount, as when Metagross felt like it could almost always force a one-to-one trade for momentum. Ghost-types and Protect predictions were absolutely necessary, but the sheer, well, explosive power of Metagross was hard to stop outright. Sure, exploding on Skarmory wasn't always the best play, so those threats were still good, but in the situations you could, it was ridiculously good. Metagross was absolutely one of the best Pokemon in Gen 3 overused. No questions asked. And things only got better for Metagross in Gen 4. The physical special split meant Thunder Punch was now a viable option for hitting water types in Skarmory. Zen Headbutt gave Metagross powerful physical stabs on both sides, and it both had access to and resisted Stealth Rocks. New items like Choice Scarf and Ockerberry increased variety, and best of all, it got a stab priority move in Bullet Punch, which, coming off of a 135 attack and Choice Band, it sure didn't seem like a base 40 power move. All those changes play out in a way you can very likely expect. Metagross's Choice Band set was still exceptionally strong, especially with Zen Headbutt and Bullet Punch. It honestly suffered from 4 move slot syndrome pretty hard. Choice Scarf was equally scary as a revenge killer. The mixed set still had its place in baiting opponents, so Metagross could have HP Fire and Grass coverage, and it could absolutely still go for an agility sweep if it desired. But Metagross's new role came as a lead Pokemon. Metagross was an incredible lead, able to set up rocks, resist explosion, ignore taunt, and even pick off Focus Sash users with its priority. Oh yeah, and it could of course always explode itself too. While this Metagross still had its issues, Heat Ran and status most frequently, it could choose Akka or Lumberry to circumvent those, being a reliable hazard setter with a whole lot of power behind it. Metagross was still an absolute terror, but it was joined by other terrors. Pokemon like Infernape were up there in power, but the bigger threats came on the defensive side. Bulky ground types like Hippowdon and Gliscor made their appearance, easily getting around Metagross's new toy in Thunder Punch, which at least let it deal with water types more easily. They had counters, sure, like Grass Knot and Ice Punch, but those moves were uncommon to see Metagross running. Magnezone was a problem too, provided it could get a Magnet Rise off before Metagross hit it with an Earthquake. Smart Metagross players would most likely just explode at this point, but that was only if it wasn't choiced. And also it sucks to use your explosion on Magnezone. But by far the biggest halt in Metagross's rampage was Rotom. It was immune to Earthquake and Explosion, resisted Meteor Mash, and could burn Metagross or stall it out. Rotom Heat could even go all in with Overheat. Metagross really had no answer to Rotom, who was seen on a huge amount of teams. Well, that's not entirely true. It did have one answer lay in tricking an Iron Ball to Rotom, who would then be shackled to the ground and able to hit by Earthquake. But that was quite a gimmicky set. It was for this reason that Metagross wasn't quite as dominant as in Gen 3, but make no mistake, it was still an incredibly solid overused pick. And then over in doubles, hey, we haven't talked about Gen 4 VGC in a while. And when we do talk about it, it's fitting that it's with Metagross. If you take a look at this image of the top VGC teams of all time, you can see that Metagross was actually the most used Pokemon in top 4 in the first 2 years of VGC, being on 5 out of the 8 top teams across those years, including both winners. There are 2 important things to remember about these formats. One, there was no team preview, and teams couldn't auto level to 50. This was very good for Metagross. No team preview was whatever, but it can be argued that taking something as reliable as Metagross would be even more beneficial, because you couldn't reliably modify for your opponent's team. Thanks to Marcus Statter, also known as 13 Yoshi 37, we know the strats for 2008 Metagross, which was actually quite unique. Yoshimura Snorlax would use Belly Drum, which was then copied with Psych Up by Bronzong and Metagross, who could then resist everything and tear through teams. While we know that the 2009 winner Kazuyuki Tsuji had a Metagross, he didn't bring it to any finals matches. But go watch Game 2 of that finals anyways for one of the craziest VGC moments ever. Metagross was used on a Rain team here, and this is where no level limit comes into play. Rain is obviously good for Metagross due to its lowering its fire type weakness, and 3 out of the 4 finalists used Rain in VGC for the simple reason that Tyranitar was effectively banned, since it evolves over level 50. Yeah, the runner-up used Hippowdon and even carried Sunny Day on his Shedinja. But even without an auto Rain ability, Rain was crazy good, and Metagross was great in Rain. What we can guess is that Metagross had Explosion, because that was the crux of what made Metagross such a monster. Paired with a Focus Sash user or a Ghost type, Metagross could choose any time to basically take the enemy duo out of commission. Of course there was counterplay, like other Focus Sash users, Protect, etc. But the ability to clear the field, or at least threaten it, was terrifying. Metagross saw a huge presence in Gen 4 VGC. Sid used it to get 3rd at the San Francisco Regionals, sporting maybe the most standard set of Bullet Punch, Meteor Mash, Explosion, and Protect. And fellow Smogon or Arcarus took 2nd at the same tournament using Stealth Rocks of all things. Yeah, Stealth Rocks at VGC, go figure. Ultimate Unknown won London with a likely similar set to Sid's. 2 of the most unique Metagross sets though came from a long-time Smogon user's Imperfectluck and Omegadonut, and there's quite a story to go along with this. Read through Omegadonut's war story here. Long story short, Omegadonut and IPL drove 3,100 miles to play in the Tennessee Regionals, enduring being stopped by the police and a flat tire, only to meet each other in finals, where they both had Metagross. This finals was nuts and really could have gone either way if Omegadonut hadn't gotten too smart for his own good. Really, read the war story. But on to the other sets. Omegadonut paired his Metagross with an Infernape as a lead in every one of these games. What's more, it was an Infernape running Feint. The idea here was to predict the Protect and feint that Pokemon, allowing Metagross to dispatch the other teams completely while Infernape lived with its Focus Sash, which allowed Infernape to either get one last huge hit off or finish the job on an opposing Sash with Mach Punch. If improvisation was needed, Metagross could always trick its Choice Scarf onto a Trick Room user, or just go for Iron Head or Rock Slide. Pretty wacky, but IPL's strategy was equally innovative. IPL used Imprison on Uxie to lock away the opponent's Protect, which, when combined with his own Metagross Metagross's Explosion and Trick Room made for a deadly combo. This wasn't seen in the finals because of Donut's anti-Trick Room strat, but it's still pretty inventive, and hey, it got him there, and won him the tournament. But what really makes this story insane is that the two faced off again in the finals of Nationals, and they both still had their Metagrosses. In fact, while IPL ditched his unique strat, Omegadonut used the exact same team, with the same feint strat, and this time he won. Talk about a run back. Anyways, Metagross was clearly incredible. It stalled no use in VGC 2010 because, well, look at the Pokemon in there, but it was arguably maybe the best VGC Pokemon in 08 and 09. And man, that took a while, but back to singles. Luckily for me, Metagross didn't change all that much in the transition to Gen 5, except for one huge nerf. Explosion no longer have defense. Light Metal, its new ability, was almost completely useless. And other than that, Metagross got pretty much nothing. Maybe Game Freak realized it was already stupidly good. Of course, the metagame switched around Metagross, and that changed things significantly. Gen 5 is commonly seen as the generation where everything's power went up, and that took Metagross down a peg along with the loss of Explosion. Most of its sets changed a little to better accommodate its tanking nature instead of its raw attacking power. Pursuit became a common option as the laddies moved into overuse, making Metagross one of the most common counters to the twins. Hammer Arm became a viable option in order to deal with opposing Ferrothorns or Heatrans. And other than that, Metagross was the same. It of course wasn't a dedicated lead anymore, as those were a thing of the past, but its Stealth Rock set was still by far its best set for its mix of utility and power. It had more room for moves because of no Explosion, but still suffered from 4 move slot syndrome. Where Metagross saw issues was in the addition of counters introduced. Scald in particular was a threat all in itself, as it targeted Metagross's weaker special defense and gave it the status it feared the most. All the old counters were still there, as you might assume, with nothing new, how could it deal with them? Slowbro, now in overuse with Regenerator, was super strong against Metagross, resisting its moves, crippling it with Thunder Wave, and hitting it hard with Scald and Fire Blast. Rotom became even more annoying because of Hydro Pump Stab, but the real bug for Metagross was Weather. While Rain was good in doubles, it didn't compare to the boost other Pokemon got, and exacerbated Metagross's bad singles matchups against water types. Sun of course made fire types even more problematic, and Sand, while normally good because of Metagross's steel typing, opened up other Pokemon to take it down like Sandslash. And I've been talking like Metagross became horrible, but that's not the case. There just weren't any more good things that happened to it. It was still really good, and definitely an overuse, just not as great. While the lack of Explosion meant Metagross wasn't quite the terror it had been in Gen 4, it was still an incredible VGC Pokemon in Gen 5. In 2011, Metagross wasn't allowed, as it was a Unova Dex only. But come 2012, Metagross became one of the most popular Pokemon in doubles. Steel types were high in demand to deal with the ever-prominent threat of Hydreigon, whose Draco Meteors were raining down everywhere. While throughout the season Metagross battled with Scizor for the spot of the premier Steel type, it took Overcome Worlds, in part because it's a better matchup against the dominant Cresselia, who carried Hidden Power Fire all the time. Metagross, for its part, had a fairly standard set. Meteor Mash and Earthquake were a must, as was Bullet Punch usually, and Protect always helped. With powerful spread damage and a useful typing, Metagross was a great pick for almost every team. Metagross won too many regionals to even name in 2012, so let's focus on its most important appearance, Worlds. Metagross had 3 appearances just in top 8 at Worlds 2012, and was one of the most common Pokemon overall. And of course, it was one of the linchpins in the 3-time winner Ray Rizzo's team. Each of these Metagrosses were pretty different. 8th placer Junpei Yamamoto's Metagross actually ran Choice Band, whereas most had done Akaberry, and also packed what he admitted was a gimmick surprise, Explosion, even through the nerf. Yamamoto tried to hide his Explosion until Game 2, and even put Hammer Arm so as to not limit himself too much by hitting his partners with Earthquake, also passing up Bullet Punch for Zen Headbutt in order to have max damage on Thundurus. Meanwhile, 3rd placer Abel Martin Sands had Metagross as his favorite Pokemon, and even named it after his tag, Flash. Abel's Metagross was also choiced, and looks more standard at first, Earthquake, Meteor Mash, and Bullet Punch. His innovation came in Ice Punch, which was similarly designed to take out Thundurus. He also used an extremely specific speed investment, which allowed him, through process of elimination, to determine how fast opposing Rotoms were. Finally, Ray's Metagross looks even more standard at first, but just like his MO, there's a huge amount going on underneath the surface. Ray ran a Trick Room team with Cresselia, and he actually chose a Speed IV that put his Metagross at just 1 point above Cresselia, meaning in Trick Room, Cresselia would go first, swaggering Metagross and triggering its Lumberry, making for a terrifying sweep. and given that he won, I'd say it worked pretty well. Come 2013, Metagross saw a tiny bit of a dip, mainly due to the introduction of Landorus Therian and the increased presence of Eruption Heatran. It was still incredibly strong and was actually on Gavin Michaels' winning US Nationals team, as well as placing in 8 of the Europeans' top 16 teams across 3 tournaments. At Worlds, Metagross didn't show up in any top 8 teams, but it was still lurking just below, on 10th placer's Yuki Matsumoto's team, and it was still in the top 20 most used Pokemon in the tournament. And Gen 6 came with a whole bunch of nerfs to Steel types in the form of lost resistances, especially important for Metagross, as it could no longer rely on doing well against Dark types. A big enough change, in fact, for it to drop to underuse. But of course, Metagross got an absolutely beastly Mega Evolution. In addition to a boost in every stat except HP, Mega Metagross has an incredible ability in Tough Claws, which boosts the power of contact moves by 30%. This let it go through fairy types like a hot steel knife through some fairy butter. Mega Metagross' main job was to wall break, with massive hits from Meteor Mash and Hammer Arm, while it used Zen Headbutt, Thunder Punch, Ice Punch, Bullet Punch, and Pursuit as it wished. There's that 4 move slot problem again, and that's without Earthquake, since it's non-contact. Mega Metagross could also try to run Rock Polish for a sweeping set, but it did mean giving up more coverage, which could be a big problem given how bad Steel was against non-fairy types. And if you really didn't want to go Mega, Assault Fest Metagross existed to trap Psychic types with its resistances and huge special defense by switching in and then hitting hard with Pursuit. Mega Metagross' counter stayed about the same as its regular form, with Slowbro and other bulky water types still being the biggest culprits along with Steel types. The biggest newcomers were Dark types like Choice-Scarf Tyranitar, who could now hit Metagross very hard due to the Steel typing changes. Bisharp and Mandibuzz were also big stoppers, but Mega Metagross was an amazing Pokemon, benefiting of 2 Metagross put on top of each other. And in VGC, Mega Metagross had a strange history. In 2014, it wasn't allowed. In 2015, it found itself being one of the more reliable Mega Pokemon at the start of the season. But as the season went on, players started to realize that Landorus Therian was the best Pokemon in the format by far, and it enjoyed a particularly good matchup against Mega Metagross. Metagross also struggled to keep up against other Megas like Salamence, Charizard, and Kangaskhan, who took even more priority over it. In terms of playstyle, it played the same as in singles, punched through everything. In the end, VGC 2015 ended up being one of the most static metagames ever, with every team in top 8 running some variation of Chalk, which is Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, Landorus, and Kangaskhan. Despite Metagross' okay matchups against Kanga with Hammer Arm, there was just no way for him to compete. Interestingly enough, in VGC 2016, the most used non-legendary was Bronzong, who shares the typing with Metagross. But it was Bronzong's better defenses and amazing support move pool that let it thrive in the metagame of Titans. And that's it, so how good was Metagross actually? It was incredible. It's been top tier every generation since its debut, even holding the status as one of the best VGC Pokemon in 3 separate formats. In doubles, it's been on 3 World Championship teams. In singles, it has consistently been a tanking monster, and even when it was finally overcome by power creep, Mega Metagross made it do what it always had done, but better. This is one of those Pokemon where, if you've ever played, you know what it's capable of. Be prepared or pay the cost. And I hear it's a big monster in Gen 7 too. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you so much to the patrons for voting for this Pokemon and for continued support of our videos, and of course thank you to everyone else watching as well. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And of course, as I always say, comment on what Pokemon you want to see next. And follow my crew on these social media platforms, yada yada yada. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.